Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Finance Town Hall. Can you advance to the next slide, please? So before we begin, I just want to confirm that we are recording today's sessions. All attendees have been placed on mute throughout the presentations. If you have any questions for the presenters, please use the Q&A function, or you can send messages directly to me, Stephanie Reed. We will address questions at the end of each presentation, and if you want to talk with other participants, you are feel free to use the chat. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Gower. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of the university, and I want to welcome you to the final town hall of this calendar year. These finance town halls have had great attendance and engagement since launching this new format in October of 2020. This includes the recently relaunched Ask the Expert sessions that we will host via virtually through Zoom after the town hall today. Our goals for the town halls and expert sessions are to strengthen the relationship between university finance administration and the university's larger financial community, and to be more transparent about the operations of the university and our financial health. Our guest speakers have presented on topics that range from institutional planning and operations, discretionary spending, research, student accounting, billing and cashier services, travel and expenses, and many more. Based on the questions that are asked during the meetings and conversations that happen offline, people are connecting with the content and with each other. We're beginning to plan now for guest speakers through calendar 2023. Toward the end of today's town hall, when you receive the meeting survey link, please share your feedback and suggestions for future meetings and future guest speakers. Next slide. So, two primary topics today. Brian Ballentine, the Senior Vice President for Strategy, and myself, we will be reviewing the RCM review implementation as it stands today. And then after that, David Moore, Associate Vice President and Chief Budget Officer, will review the fiscal year 2023 budget. Next. And with that, we will begin. Next. So when we began the RCM process in 2016, part of what we built into the plan was a regular series of reviews. If you put in a budget model, or for that matter, any large institutional kind of initiative, you should build in periodic reviews to make sure that it is still achieving its goals, or if it isn't fully achieving those goals, what things might you do to adjust to that? The RCM 5-year review was conducted during summer, or completed in the summer of 2021, and that was led by my friend and colleague, Brian Ballentine, whom I want to introduce and give him the baton right now.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for having me here. Yeah, it's my pleasure to help provide a bit of an update on where we stand in implementing the recommendations that were made by the RCM Review Committee as it completed its work. So as many of you will recall, in fall of 2020, President Holloway charged the Office of Strategy with leading the 5-year review that Mike has alluded to. That review was conducted by a group of deans, faculty members, administrators who worked for the better part of a year on the review. Review included a university-wide survey, numerous discussion forums, studies of best practices, and a lot of input from students, faculty, and staff from across the university. The review is, the committee accepted, submitted its report to the president in the summer of 2021, which he accepted. At that point, the finance team set to work on the complicated task of implementing the recommendations made by the review committee. You can see the timeline of activities here. What I'd call your attention to At the bottom of the page are a few areas where the university was immediately responsive to the review, including around revising the function of the budget advisory committees for the cost pools, working on the alignment of strategic funding and the university mission, and building out a stronger educational infrastructure to make the budget model more navigable. While the implementation of the recommendations remains a work in progress, we'll dive into each one of these areas in the coming slides. So let's go to the next slide, please. One major area of focus during the review process was ensuring the alignment of the budget model and our mission as a public research university. One key goal that emerged from the review is to create greater clarity and coordination around the pool of strategic and capital funding deployed by the chancellors and president. To address this need, with Mike's leadership, we've adopted a common definition of strategic funding and a regular process by which strategic funding decisions are coordinated across the president and chancellor-led units. We've worked to define strategic funds as primarily supporting efforts where we need university-wide collaboration around shared challenges like student aid and scholarships, the launch of new academic initiatives, faculty support and development programs, and initiatives related to strengthening equity and access across Rutgers. Related to the goal of clearer communication about budget decisions, another immediate outcome of the RCM review process was the institution of a regular budget address by the president and CFO to share budget priorities and challenges with the university community. That's a practice that's now entering its second year. Let's go to the next slide, please. The RCM review defined the need for the university to more explicitly demonstrate that the budget and the budget model work in service of our broader educational mission. A well-functioning budget model requires institutional clarity about academic priorities. A number of major planning and policy activities since the review was completed have been responsive to this need. The academic master planning process in New Brunswick, for example, has underscored student success and collaborative research as two of the top priorities of our largest campus. The RCM review revealed the need for greater clarity around how we assess mission-centered outcomes for our academic units. To that end, the university has formalized a policy on academic program review so that we have a regular way of talking about where we need investment. Understanding that some of the challenges around collaborative research are budgetary and administrative, the Office of Research spent last year writing a policy to foster more consistent practices to account for F&A costs across the university. And finally, major investments are being made around student support, including the Scarlet Promise grants and free tuition programs based on income status that are now available at each Rutgers campus. Let's go to the next slide, please. The RCM review also revealed the need for attention to education and communication around the budget model. To that end, in implementing recommendations, we have set out a number of goals related to clarifying the terminology that we use in the budget model with the goal of ensuring that it reflects the academic mission, improving the educational resources for the community around the budget model, greater transparency around the central services that are accounted for in the cost pools, and improving the mechanisms for input into services that are needed or not. You will see some early results of this work on the RCM implementation microsite that it comes at the end of this presentation. And that's an effort that aims to reflect some of the best practices from across higher education around how to effectively communicate budget models within universities. And I'd like to express my appreciation for the work of the communications team in finance for all they've done there. Now let me turn this presentation over to Mike for the remaining slides.
Thanks, Brian. So the budget and budget advisory process was one that had started prior to the initiation of the RCM review, but it was very clear that it was not well understood, not well defined. So one of the recommendations was enhancing the clarity, transparency, and mechanisms for input on budget and budget process, and the timing and structure of the annual budget process. The annual budget process is almost a 12-month cycle now. We have to begin in the summer in order to have a budget ready for the Board of Governors to approve in the following June. The budget advisory committees, again, previously known as cost pool advisory committees, are made up of representatives across all 4 of the chancellor units. These are leaders of responsibility centers. The responsibility centers is the question in the chat. Those are the schools. Those are some of the major research centers, auxiliaries like housing and dining. In other words, any of the sorts of units that actually earn revenue for the university. Those are the responsibility centers, and those are the ones that receive allocated costs from central units as well as the administrative units, administrative and support units of the chancellor areas. That committee, now referred to as the Budget Advisory Committee, again, is made up of deans, directors, and other representatives of chancellor units that are part and should be part of the discussions of what kinds of central services they're budgeted for, what level, what kind of support they should receive. When I'm talking about central services, let me give you a rundown of the budget advisory committees themselves. There is one for institutional planning and operations. There's one for university human resources. There's one for the Office of Information Technology. There's one for my area, which is University Finance and Administration. And there's one for the Office for Research. In addition, we have reviews, processes for the functions such as the Office of the President and related functions to that that go through some of these budget advisory committees. So the goals of coming out of that process was to improve the effectiveness of the committees themselves, get the committee meetings actually cycled up, synced up with the budget cycle itself, have multiple sets of meetings throughout the year, not just during the budget preparation time, but throughout the year to allow for greater conversation and more understanding of the operations of a particular area. And then to look at some of the more complicated things like the metrics themselves, how things are allocated, and to make recommendations regarding those. So actions in progress and completed, developing the assessment process for the budget advisory committees. We've established clear guidelines and roles of responsibilities. They can always be improved, but we've had a much better cycle since the beginning of this calendar year, going up to right now, in terms of the meetings themselves, the content of the meetings, the intent of the meetings, and the discussions out of those. So we will continue to do these. These are not just during the budget cycle. We'll have spring meetings that allow for, again, further conversation and really understanding the kind of impact that the receivers of the costs, if you will, can put upon the process itself. Next slide. So the cost allocation itself, the RCM budget model itself is a cost allocation tool. It was always intended to provide a consistent path by which central administrative and local administrative costs, those from the chancellor-led units, could be allocated to the responsibility centers in a reasonable fashion. These are inherently indirect costs. If they were direct costs, they could be charged directly to schools. These are things that cover either entire chancellor units or the university as a whole, such as, I use example in my area, the accounting function, the banking function, the insurance function. Those are things that are not done at each chancellor unit. They're not done at each school. They are done for the university as a whole, and those costs need to be allocated to the areas that actually earn the revenue. So the goals of the cost allocation coming out of the review was facilitate a consistent and logical cost allocation process. So we put a process or a set of allocations in some 6 years ago now, and it was very reasonable to take a step back and say, are they working? Are they reasonable? Are they consistent? Are they achieving the goals that we want them to achieve? Improving the understanding of the cost allocation process themselves. There are very few people who are cost accountants or have gone through cost accounting processes like I have. If you're not in that world, you need to learn what the language is. We need to make the language more approachable. We need to make it more understandable. Then some specific things coming out of that are understand whether the research costs that are allocated are proportional to F&A rates themselves. Presumably, the theory is that the F&A that's earned by a school is what is used to pay for its research costs. Assess feasibility and impacts recommendations to exclude training grants from the cost allocation formula. That trying to put emphasis on training grants in a way that does not dissuade a unit from taking them for fear that they would increase the allocated costs that would come to them. And assess the feasibility and impacts of recommendations to exclude equipment grants from the cost allocation process. So what's in progress now is evaluating the technical and functional feasibility of implementing recommendations like excluding training grants. How do we use that as an example? How do we exactly find them? How do we take them out of a statistical process? How do we then move forward mechanically, if you will, through the math itself to exclude something like that? We've completed the initial assessments for the data sources and be working with OIT and financial information systems to understand how those things, as an example, could be implemented. And they could be implemented in the next budget cycle. This is also something to consider, that the cycle is an annual thing. We can do work now that will affect not the fiscal 24 budget, but the fiscal 25 budget. To a certain degree, it's too late already to make any changes in the model. Brian alluded to a microsite that contains information around the RCM review implementation. This microsite, I think Stephanie has put the link in the chat, is part of the finance.rutgers.edu area, but focuses exclusively on this and will be focused on implementation updates as we go forward. This is a big piece of work. I want to thank also the communications team, as well as the University Budget Office and those others who were involved in putting this together. But I think you will find it to be informative, and over time will give you a good flavor for what kind of progress we are making in putting forward these implementations. Again, the site link is in the chat and will be available when these slides are sent around. Next. I want to pause there. Stephanie, do we have any questions regarding the presentation or anything related to it?
Yep, we do. We have a couple of questions already. So the first question is, the responsibility centers that earn revenue, is that revenue unrestricted funds revenue, such as tuition and student fees, or is it sponsored grant funding considered earned revenue, even though that revenue is solely for specific research?
Sponsored grant funding is considered earned revenue, yes. Hence, some of the larger larger research centers that really work at the chancellor level, if you will, or even university wide. They're considered responsibility centers.
Great. Thank you. And the next question is a bit of a two-part question. Are the names of the individuals on each budget advisory committee public?
We can make those public, certainly. In fact, I was just refreshing the list the other day because there are a number of people who have moved and we have new appointees to those. So I'm sure we can put that on the microsite. And I can have that in a matter of a day or two.
Okay, thank you. Then the second part of the question is, are there at least some people from the functional areas on each committee, not to just have deans on the facilities advisory committee or the OIT advisory committee, but also some people from units who actually oversee facilities or IT and are in a position to evaluate the plans presented by the cost centers?
I'll have to go back and look at the list. The appointments are actually made by each chancellor, and there's representation across all 4 chancellor units. And I just don't have in the top of my head. I think though primarily we are talking about deans and directors. There may be a few examples of what you referred to. I will take a quick look. And see what comes to mind there, but I'm thinking they are primarily, just from memory, primarily deans and directors.
Great. Those are all the questions we have at this time, but if you do have questions for Mike and Brian, feel free to enter them in the chat.
Okay, I'm just taking a quick look at that. I'll see if I can have something more definitive about that by the end of the session, end of the next presentation. Answer that question. Okay, well, without further ado, I'd like to thank Brian Ballentine for being part of the presentation, and we will continue to inform the community as work progresses on the RCM implementation. Now I'd like to introduce David Moore, Associate Vice President, Chief Budget Officer, who's going to give some FY22 year-end result information as well as budget updates for the current year. David?
Thank you, Mike. Today I will share with you some preliminary results from the fiscal year 2022 and how that compares to the approved budget. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Rutgers' annual budget reflects the values of the university in fulfilling its core priorities of outstanding teaching, research, service, clinical care, while providing the best academic experience for our students. As we conclude fiscal year 22, actual expenses were approximately about 51.2 million more than the total budget of 4.8 billion. Let's go to the next slide. This slide shows the difference between the FY22 university budget, which is displayed by the gray bars, and the FY22 actuals that are displayed by the red bars. These are preliminary information, but the first expense category is the university's core missions that had an approved budget of 77.9% of the approved 4.8 billion budget. And at the end of the fiscal year 2022, actual spending shows approximately 78.3%. The university's core mission represents our core mission of student instruction, research, public service, and patient care. The next category is administration and operations, and the second expense category that we track. This particular category was within budget amount of the 14.5% of the actual expense and budgeted provided. Third category is our auxiliary enterprises, which primarily covers parking, dining, housing, and was budgeted at 4.8, and the total the actual expense was approximately 4.6 of the total amount spent. Last category that we have shown is the athletics, which had a budget of that represented 2.8% of the total budgeted amount, and the actual spending of approximately 2.6 of that amount for fiscal year 22. Next slide. So let's go a little bit deeper to explore kind of these categories so we have full understanding. The classroom instruction and academic support includes faculty compensation, staff support for academic units, libraries, and dean's offices. In 22, approximately about 1.4 billion, or 29.5% of the total amount was spent. This category saw some salary savings due to retirements and vacant positions throughout the year. As you can imagine, as we look at some of these categories, that's going to be a consistent theme. As last year, we did see quite a bit of salary savings that came from total compensation. The next category, student services and scholarships. This includes financial aid, admissions, and social and cultural events for students, which accounts for about 641.8 million, or 13.2% of the annual amount spent. This category had an overall increase that was primarily due to the receipt of the American Rescue Plan, which provided additional emergency direct financial aid funds to our students in fiscal year 22. Sponsor research and other sponsor programs and activities include funds spent on research and other sponsor activities associated with federal, state, and non-governmental grants and contracts, which accounted for almost 579.5 million, or about 11.9% of the annual budget. Public service and extension and patient care includes agricultural extension programs, delivery of health care, support for health clinics and community services. And this accounted for approximately 1.1 billion, or 23.7%. The total of these represents our core mission, which accounts for approximately 3.7 billion, or just slightly over 78%, or 78.3% of the annual amount. Next slide. So rounding out the overall amount spent, 21.7% represents the remaining categories here. General administration will support central administration offices such as research administration, finance, human resources, procurement, legal. For examples, those categories accounted for slightly over 456 million, or 9.4% of the annual amount. This category again saw some salary savings due to vacant positions throughout the year. This category also, along with the last two categories, are very similar again in that savings in total compensation, again due to the vacancies that we experienced. Operation and maintenance of all Rutgers buildings includes insurance, fuels, and upkeep, utility costs, which accounted for approximately a little over 250 million, or 5.2%. Auxiliary enterprises, again, primarily including housing, dining, as well as parking operations, accounts for approximately 217.9 million, or 4.6%. And then rounding out athletics, which includes the 24 men's and women's Division I sports programs at Rutgers, New Brunswick, accounts for approximately 133.5 million, or 2.6%. Next slide. So let's kind of turn where the funding came from. Approximately 26.9% of the total revenues came from tuition fees. We also saw some a little bit of softening in the tuition fees when we compared it to budget. Patient care services which includes governmental payers, private insurers, and affiliated agreements for patient care services, accounted for 21.1%. Approximately 19% came from the state of New Jersey, some in unrestricted operating support, and a portion to cover the cost of fringe benefits for some of our employees. Sponsored research includes grants and contracts from federal and state and non-governmental entities, makes up approximately 16.4% of the overall total revenues. And rounding out would be the miscellaneous sources, which includes student federal and state aid at 16.6%. These last two categories really saw the impact of the receipt of the American Rescue Plan. First, for scholarships or for financial aid, the amount of funding that we received for student emergency financial aid awards from the American Rescue Plan. And then in the sponsored research area in terms of the federal funding that came through for institutional support, which helped offset costs associated with the impact from the pandemic that the university experienced. Turning to updates for 2023. Let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The university has approved $5.1 billion budget. This slide shows the major revenue categories that we track each year. Now that we have completed the first quarter, we are experiencing some slim margins in our overall revenue targets, where 91% of our revenues are either flat, challenged to meet the target for the current year, or show that every dollar that comes in is really reimbursed from an expense item that we've expensed already. So really kind of a cost reimbursable type funding. This leaves approximately about 9% of our revenues that possibly could help in the event that other sources do not meet their budgeted levels. Therefore, that really is starting to show, if you will, the overall slim margins that we're working with this year. Next slide. In addition, on the expense side, we're certainly still dealing with quite a bit of headwinds that are coming from areas that are listed here and will likely continue into FY 2024. So certainly into our planning for fiscal year 2024. Those categories are the high cost of in living, which is kind of based off the increased inflation. But we see this as we drive by a gas station, although we do see some relief. The amount is still higher than the pre-inflation increase when it started. So we still see a higher amount before or currently before where we had a little bit less. In addition to the uncertainty of the continued impact from the COVID-19 pandemic, the pandemic has a long-term impact and continues to impact us on both the revenues and expense side. The university continues to monitor the financial uncertainty of the pandemic, and understanding how this impacts our institution over the next few years is going to be essential. Kind of the next item, the Great Resignation. We've all dealt with that. Last part of last year, we were dealing with quite a bit of that. You saw that as a kind of some of the results that came through with savings on total compensation. Although there was savings, it has caused quite a pinch, if you will, for our operations, and getting those vacancies hired also has cost a lot of time. We see the declines in the high school graduation continue. You see the impacts as it goes through the Northeast and is continuing. We're going to see that for a number of years, or the number of several years coming up, that high school graduation decline. And last, just a lot due to the inflation increase, but also to high cost of living, the compensation benefit increases that are happening as well, which is impactful because our expense budget makes up over 65% of our budget represents total compensation. Next slide. So now let's talk a little bit about where the university is in terms of the budget process. And we'll also talk a little bit about the state process as well. So this slide takes a look at the university budget process and where we are at the start of November. During this time, we are starting to complete the central and local service unit budgets that will then be provided via the budget system to the colleges and schools, which is part of the RCM allocation. During the month of January through May, or the months through that time period, colleges and schools will be working on their budgets and preparing to meet with their chancellor units, which then will all be brought together for an overall per location budget, which then is consolidated into the total university budget. Next slide. On the state side, again, in the month of November here, we are completing our asking budget documents that are due to the state each year. We'll be submitting that to the state here toward the end of this month. Once that's submitted during the months of January through approximately May and into June, the state budget will be presented by the governor. This will go through both houses, so they'll be going through the legislative action and process. And once that process is completed, a bill is then presented to the governor. At that particular point, it can be either signed or changed via line item veto, for example. But toward the end of May and sometimes even into June, we'll have some understanding of what the 24 budget from the state will look like. Next slide. Thank you. As we plan for the future, we want to make sure that we're hearing from you. We're in, as we plan, it's a collective we and in this together. So we have created a site that people can go to. I'm sorry, not a site, an email that people can send to. ruckersideas@finance.rutgers.edu. Please send us your ideas. We want to hear from you. And certainly as we work through developing our financial plans for FY 2024 and into the future, these are great ideas that we can take into consideration. That will conclude the kind of the overview of the budget and where we're at in the budget development. And I'll take comments and questions. Stephanie, thank you.
Sure. Thank you, David. So we do have 3 questions right now. The first is, will there be any additional fringe benefits relief in FY 23? And will the fringe increase hit retroactive during this fiscal year?
So the fringe relief in terms of amounts that we have received through state, there is the continuation of that relief from the previous year, and we'll be working through that. And in terms of working through some of the things that were impacted last year with the delayed receipt of approved fringe benefits, we are still working through that with discussions with our auditors, but also to working with our with state representatives to kind of see what the outcome could be.
Great, thank you. The next question is, how can we tell how much of the revenue from our grants indirect costs portion goes into our department's funds?
There is, through our reports, a line item that is called facilities and administrative costs, and that comes through as a category on a lot of reports. So we'll provide that. We'll have a follow-up to kind of show that as we provide follow-up to this meeting. We'll show you where you can find that particular revenue category, and we will list the natural accounts that you'll find that in.
So let me just follow up on that, David. So the indirect costs, the F&A, if you will, that comes from that's earned on each individual grant as activity goes on, is returned to the school or center that earned it, or that generated it. So if a faculty member is in the School of Arts and Sciences, the School of Arts and Sciences will receive the F&A as one of its general revenues in order to pay for the indirect costs associated with that research that are charged through the RCM process. That's one of the sources of revenue for paying for the indirect costs. So it does return to the school where the research is being conducted. And I see the clarification on fringe. Let me just add to that. So the major component of the fringe benefit rate comes from the state of New Jersey. And it is primarily the method by which we are charged, and also we earn money relative to fringe benefit costs that the state pays on our behalf, but there's a large number of positions for which they do not, including activity on grants and contracts. That fringe rate typically comes to us in the fall as a proposal in the fall of a year. So we recently have received information regarding the current year's rate as it is proposed. And as they propose, because it still has to go through an entire approval process with the federal government before it is final. The timing that for getting through that approval process is uncertain. As in prior years when we got a rate partway through the year that we could finally charge. We've had to work with all the units to figure out how to backdate it, if you will, because it's effective as of July 1 of 22, backdated into 22, backdated into the grants. We did go an entire fiscal year without having an approved rate, a new approved rate. We received it finally in August of this fiscal year. We are negotiating with the state basically on how the amount of money that we would have paid if we had had it in time, how we're going to be dealing with that. And all I can say is right now we do not anticipate charging back into fiscal 22 for fringe benefit increases that occurred as of that date in August. I wish I knew when the state would get an approved rate for this fiscal year. I can say that it's a substantial increase, primarily because of increase in healthcare as well as pension and retirement costs. The programs that are, that we all benefit from as employees. And that's a great concern. But I cannot speculate as to when we will get that. David, anything else to add on that?
No. Stephanie, are there other questions?
There are.
Okay.
So URA AFT members are working without a contract or raise since July 1, 2022. With so many savings in salary expense, why can't our new contract be negotiated fairly and expeditiously so we can finally receive our raises?
I'll take that. Neither David or I are permitted from discussing something that is actively at the bargaining table. And those contracts are being actively negotiated, so we cannot speak to those. I just say categorically, it is not my place to be able to get in the middle of that. The negotiations between the parties has to happen at the bargaining table.
Our next question. It seems that there has been quite some time since we've had a cost of living increase. As such, are there plans for at least a cost of living increase in the near future?
Well, we in fact did have a cost of living increase of 2.5% as of March 1st of 2022. That was part of the catching up of what had been prior negotiated agreements, but as adjusted, as agreed to by the unions and the university in regard to the COVID emergency. The next cost of living increase will be governed by the negotiations between the university and the respective unions that is going on right now.
So we have a couple of other questions that are clarifying questions and follow-ups to the discussion on fringe. The first is, are you saying that the FY22 fringe rate will not be charged to projects?
So the FY22 fringe rate is being charged to projects back to July 1 of 22, not July 1 of 21. So we received the rate in August. We have, I believe, have gone through the process of making that effective as of July 1 of 22, this past July. So that is the adjustment that we are expecting. So it's been put into place.
Thank you. And then the next is, so if our award is still open and we can make the adjustment for fringe, we shouldn't. Tableau shows the correct fringe rates, but Oracle does not, so nothing is reconciling.
I think I'm going to have to we have to take that one offline. I'm not quite sure. Like I said, we are expecting to charge the fringe rate back to July 1 of 22. If we are having a problem with Tableau working through that, I think we need to work through that. And I would appreciate the person who asked that to get in contact with David directly, and then we can figure out if there is something wrong with Tableau or if we need to make some kind of adjustment.
Yeah. We have another question. Just bear with me for a second. Okay, so our next question is who or what central services department of locations would be impacted in terms of whose budget it would affect to fulfill the requirement of transportation services that's required to transport non-drivers from other Rutgers locations, such as the need to travel from College Ave to Knightsbridge. How does that work and who would be responsible for that?
Stephanie, sorry, I'm just gonna reread that real quick here, sorry.
Right, so are there plans? Are there plans or is there a conversation in place around transportation from other Rutgers locations, such as College Avenue to Knightsbridge, and who would be responsible for that?
Not that I am aware of.
Right.
It looks like those are all of the questions that we have for now. Oh, actually, nope, we do have another one. Regarding fringe benefits, is there a difference in the costs associated with fringe benefits attributed to the different unions, Colt, looks like, versus administrative? Executive.
Not by union, it is by type of position. So there is a rate for graduate students, GATAs. There's a rate for house staff, residents in the medical area, and postdocs. There's a rate for police and fire personnel, and then there's a rate for everybody else. So there are 4 rates, and it just depends on what position you are in, each individual's in, that the rates are charged against the salaries that are accrued on the financial system. So again, THGAs have one rate, postdocs and house staff residents have one rate. Police and fire personnel, primarily police, and then everyone else. if you go from one union to another union, and your position is, still fits within the same category there, it is, the rate would not change.
There's another follow-up question on fringe. Whether
Yeah,
something,
something will be sent out. Again, we've been negotiating with the state regarding fiscal 22, and we're at a point where, yeah, I will be sending something out that confirms the charging since 7/1/22. But yes, something will go out on that. But because we were negotiating, I was hesitant about putting it out too soon, but I think we're at a position now where I could do so.
we have another question. The delay in annual cost of living increases is also affecting non-aligned employees. So is there a plan to address these employees outside of the current negotiations with unions?
Well, past practice has been that we try to do them at the same time. So that is the intent, but again, I'm not going to be able to talk about what is the process in terms of those negotiations.
Next question is in the chat. Is Rutgers out of the spending freeze that COVID created because of staffing shortage issues, increase in student body, and increase in faculty research activities? We find ourselves struggling navigating the ERF requests and other approval requests that go up the chain and slow us down at every turn.
So I'm not sure which unit you're in, but I can say that we are in the process of sunsetting the ERF. The ERF requests, each chancellor unit and each central unit is working out its mechanism, how it wants to handle position requests internally. But we are going to be at the point of taking that ERF process out of the way of transmission to University Human Resources. And ERF is it was the process by which a position would be approved from a budgetary and budgetary authority perspective during COVID, and as we were recovering out of that, off the top of my head, I know it's emergency request form or employee requisition form or something like that, but I know it has been a difficult process for many, and we're going to get that out of the way. But each chancellor unit will insert its own process as it defines it, as it wishes. Thank you. I've used the ERF as the term for so long, I can't even remember that what it stood for, but we want to get it out of the way. Stephanie, are there other questions?
There is a clarification regarding the transportation question. Who's to start the conversation with? The question was suggesting that the service is needed, and the person who submitted the question doesn't know where to even go to begin the conversation.
I think that would be with Tony Calcato, since transportation function reports to him.
And I think the last item we have is just a comment, appreciation for addressing the fringe questions, because faculty have been very concerned regarding how it'll impact their sponsored research funds, and the information and future written clarification will be greatly appreciated.
Happy to. It is a very confusing process, and it is one for which we have little control. we have to react to the state's timetable, or the relationship between the state and the federal government as those things go on. And it is very disruptive to go 2 months into the next fiscal year before we got the rate for the previous fiscal year was very difficult. We will get out a communication soon regarding the proposed rates, and they will not be official. We cannot use them for grants and contracts until they are approved by the federal government. So that's uncertain what time that would be. And again, we are negotiating with the state regarding this, but we are going to minimize impact going in, or minimize or even eliminate impact going into the prior fiscal year. But grants and contracts will be responsible for funding the fringe benefit rate back to July 1 of 22.
We have another question. Are we also going to be sunsetting the discretionary spending approval step in Marketplace as well?
So the discretionary spending approval step is at the discretion of the Chancellor Unit or Cabinet Unit, and has been for some time. So that is dependent on that. I would, if it were me, I would suggest not. We are looking at some financial headwinds that David referred to, and I think we should be cautious about only spending when we absolutely must, in order to preserve flexibility for unknowns, especially inflation and so on. So I would not recommend that we eliminate it, but it is again at the discretion of the various chancellor-led units and organizational units, and has been.
That's it for the questions right now.
Okay. Well, if there are any other questions, follow-ups that you would like, please send them to Stephanie. We will get answers and post them. We will post the presentation to the finance website along with the recording later today, I suspect. Again, thank you all for joining. Stephanie, we're going to roll straight into the Ask the Experts.
The Ask the Expert sessions will begin at 10:30. I just
Okay. All right.
in the chat with the details for each of the sessions that we're hosting.
Okay. So beginning at 10:30, I hope you can join one of the Ask the Expert sessions be held in the separate Zoom meeting rooms. The information is in the chat. These sections that are similar to virtual office hours with no presentation, but an opportunity for you to ask questions of our teams from University Budget Office, Financial Information Systems within the University Controller's Office, Procurement Services, Accounts Payable, Travel Card and Expense Reporting, and finally, Research Financial Services. Also, want to remind you, we ask your help in guiding these meetings going forward. Please complete the meeting survey. There's a section in it around Ask the Experts that we can use to guide going forward in terms of topics and areas that you might want to have for this. So this month, for your information, the experts are for the University Budget Office, David Moore, Vincent So, Khadidra Wongbi, and Perot Victor from Financial Information Systems from the Controller's Office, Betsy Cafaro Rick Merkel and Anthony Spagnuolo. From University Procurement Services for purchasing and accounts payable, Marcy Bloom, Gary Kassan, Wanda Bach, Maggie Quinn. From Travel Card and Expense Reporting, Ann Gutzik and Mike Phillips. And from University Research Financial Services, Lamar Oglesby. I want to thank each of them who are participating in this. I hope they will be useful to you. And with that, if there are no other questions or comments, I think we will conclude as part of the Finance Town Hall. I want to thank again Brian Ballentine and David Moore for presentations today. I want to thank Stephanie and the team behind the scenes to put this together. And there's a significant team that puts these on, the arrangement for these every time. And with that, I think we will conclude. Thanks everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday coming up.